The word democratic is probably the most overused in our dictionaries. Everything is or isn't democratic, even Russian elections. Now there's a contradiction. Russia goes through pro- and anti-Western phases. And what do authoritarian states see in having elections anyway? So, from shipbuilding to elections, what does Russia actually see in the West? Join me, Jan Darash, for how we got here.
In recent Russian elections, President Vladimir Putin secured another 6 years in power. However, the three-day vote was seen by the international observers as a mere formality due to absence of real opposition and a relentless crackdown on dissent.
I urge my colleagues not to even call it an election, in quotes or not in quotes. This is a procedure, an undemocratic procedure which only resembles an election.
Putin claimed 87% of the vote, the biggest share he's claimed in any of his previous presidential wins, the first one dating all the way back to year 2000.
This is while Russia is waging war in Ukraine, Putin is waging special operation inside Russia. And that for me is a manifestation of that. After this 87%, I would expect greater repression inside Russia.
While officially a democratic state, in practice virtually all power in the country is in the hands of Putin. But this phenomenon is not unique to Russia. Over time, many dictatorship-style regimes have held elections that serve more as a plebiscite, to test the system rather than a genuine democratic process. In the past, North Korea's Kim Jong-un and Syria's Bashar al-Assad have both claimed stunning success at their own elections. In North Korea, elections usually feature 99.99% voter turnout and single-candidate ballots, with each candidate usually winning 100% of the vote in their constituencies. Similarly, Assad secured nearly 89% of the votes in 2014 and over 95% in 2021, all in elections widely regarded as fraudulent.
Another round of elections makes it very, very hard for all of us, Syrians and non-Syrians, all of us who cares about the humanity and the human rights, to believe that what's going on in Syria will come to an end soon.
These elections, while seemingly democratic, are often marred by limitations and irregularities. They take place in tightly controlled environments where there are no real alternatives to the incumbent, no public criticism of the regime, and widespread reports of fraud.
I'm delighted to welcome our guest tonight, Professor Agnieszka Legucka, at the Russian analyst at the East European Programme at the Polish Institute of International Affairs. So welcome to the programme.
Thank you for the invitation.
Great to have you. Before we go into the historical background of the Russian elections, just a couple of things about what you wrote about the current elections. Now, one of them was that they were a test of the Russian system. So given what we know about the Russian system, what did they have to test anyway?
Everything. I mean, the system is based on many elements. Russians are calling it admin resource. The whole administration background and the whole structure of military and then police, everything. Every element should work in the process of elections. This is not the moment, this is the process. How loyal are every part, every person in the system, especially those who are working in administration under Putin, but on the federal level, on the regional level, on the local level, everyone needs to pass the loyal action towards the leader. If that happens, if everyone in the system work properly, if every mechanism is working properly, without disturbance, without protest, without undermining this process by the Russian citizens, especially, or if something probably could happen on the front line, then the system affects it sees as an effective one. If it's effective one, there are two main messages from this moment. The first message that there is no alternative to Putin. Right? Everyone knew before that he will paint the results, how Russians is calling that. But the second message is even more important, that the Putin is still the guarantor of the system, that he still can push by fear or payment, every element for in working in the process.
So the figure that we get, 88% approval, would that be a pass mark, or how would he see that? Too little, too low? We had some news of the flash mob protests within different urban areas, but how will he gauge that result?
This is more like we knew that every element of the system, admin resource, received the message, how many people should go to the voting, how many percentage of the turnout should be on the paper. But I think he can be satisfied with that there was no particular disturbance in the process, and that results are quite enough for him, when it comes to whole Russia. But the most also important for us to see on those occupied territories by Russian soldiers, Ukrainians decided with the quote, of course, decided to vote even more on Putin, because there he painted the results more than 90%.
Yes. To broaden out the idea of an election in an authoritarian regime, what do countries such as North Korea or Syria or some of the Central Asian countries, what do they gain from showing the world that they have a system which has 80-90% approval rate? What does that give them? Why do they bother doing all the work for these elections?
All the painted results. I think for this moment, for Putin, is another important message that Russians, as a majority, approves his military actions in Ukraine. So we can look at in the future in the sense that he will provide a war, he will continue the war, aggressive war toward Ukraine, because he has so much support for it. And that's why it will not be so visible if he would have like 51%, because that would be a message for the elite that maybe not particularly every element worked in the system, because that kind of messages are particularly important for this very little circle around Putin. And the very important question in authoritarian system, and even I would say even Russia is becoming a neo-totalitarian system, the message or the question which not supposed to be given: who will be next Putin? And that is the fear of himself, for his own security, but at the same time, this is a fear of his very close partners and co-workers who are very old enough, because he doesn't allow another new generation come into the very narrow circle.
So in a way, they just have a different set of values about looking at the same result. They don't look at it through a Western democratic model. They have a different model of what a democracy should be.
I mean, they are proud of it. They are even saying that they have better democracy than we do, because that kind of results are the proof, not only the winning of Putin, but at the same time the winning of majority of Russians who are much more intelligent. I've heard that kind of sentences from Russian authorities. They are better than.
Well, just to pick up on this idea of a Russian superiority, given that the democracy is a Western construct, Peter I went over to the West, to Holland and to England, to learn the carpentry for the shipbuilding, and wanted to modernise his fleet. Great Western influence in terms of Eastern Russian high culture, classical music, literature, the advantages of a posh English, British education. Is this the idea of Russia holding democracy? Is that also part of this historical trend of imitating the West, or taking what's taking what's good from the West and creating a superior Russian system? How do you gauge
When I
that?
follow Russia history and even modern history, I came to sometimes to the thesis that, or answer that Russia is still a state, or the concept in statu nastendi. It's still ongoing process. Who Russians or Russia is exactly, how they identify themselves. They are part of Europe, maybe they are part of Asia. And through 90s, when the democracy is supposed to win above all the historical imperial background, actually it was the very turbulent moment. I was living there in Moscow back then in the early 90s, and I was observing that people were having a lot of troubles regarding the ordinary life, like day by day, surviving day by day. And Putin is using that kind of moment because he's all the time saying that he doesn't want to bring the Western democracy to Russia, because it's usually very equal to chaotic moment, turbulent time,
Yes.
and hyperinflation and everything bad what happened for the ordinary people in Russia, not for oligarchs, because that back then they were much more powerful than they are right now. So the moment how they identify, they differently understand democracy. And I've heard a lot of times that we don't want democracy, we want normal life, because democracy they affect with this economic problems that they've had before.
Are the ideas of democracy, as we understand it in the West, just for the elites of St. Petersburg and Moscow?
I think that they are gaining some advantages from the West. We were thinking for many years that we can westernize Russian elites, especially young generation. But with my colleague at PISM, we conducted a report about Kremlin kids, meaning that the children of the elite, exactly the second circle of the elite, the younger generation, like, I don't know, children of Lavrov, Patrushev, and other like Peskov, they were educated in the West, they were living there, they could compare the Russian system and also the Western system, and they were always complaining about the West. And when they came back, rather they strengthened and petrified the Putinism, or not westernizing it at all. Those values, they were like saying, okay, democracy can work in London, in Paris, but not in Russia, because of the history. And Russia, how I observing and read a lot of books and like philosophic approach, they are using some kind of mood from 19th century about Europe. And that kind of sentences that Putin is giving to the audience, that the West is bad and individual, too much concentrated on capitalism and economy. Rather, Russia is supposed to be deeper,
yes,
more cultural, more educated, and etc. It's actually slogans from 19th century, because Europe was always a mirror for Russians to look how they supposed to invent themselves. So it's like very contradictory political culture, because on one hand they are complaining and look with like disappointment over Europe, but at the same time, if they are doing like repairing a house, they are doing it as a Euro remont. It means the European standards, it's better than Russians. The education is better, the medicine is better. So I see a lot of contradictions. That's why I say that it's like in statu nastendi identity, it's still building itself. And for now, Russia started a new experiment, not to be so much involved in Europe, because I probably will talk about it in a moment, but they look on Asia, they look on China and Eurasia. So they are taking the Eurasiatism as a background for their political movement. So they are saying we are not Europe and we are not Asia. We are civilization as Russians.
And this reaches into Russia's history as part of the Golden Horde and the Eastern Eastern brutality. You have Russian brutality mixed with Western sophistication. My point being that someone described Japan as elegance and brutality, a mixture of East and West. How do you think Russia, last question, have found out that this idea of the Russian soul? Are they still, is this like you said, it's a work in progress all the time?
I do not believe in Russian soul, no. Especially when I observe Russian aggressive action towards nowadays. It's very hard for me to say that it's like a soul. There is no soul anymore. I observe it, the brutality. But there was one book interesting that by Dominique Moisy, who wrote the book about geopolitics of emotions. And he said that Europe, for example, is the emotion of fear, the Asia is emotion of hope, and then other parts. But he said something like this, that the Russian is a mixture of emotions, is a mixture of fear, that they are all the time complaining that they are under the threat from the West, under the threat of expansion of NATO, under everything. Everyone wants to destroy Russia. So there is a fear. And another emotion I observe is a proud. They think about themselves that they are better. They are better than Ukrainians, they are better than West, they are better than Chinese, they are better on every level. So it's a mixture of very different identities, sometimes really contradictory.
Professor Legucka, we have to wind it up there, unfortunately. Fascinating topic. Thank you very much for coming onto the programme.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Pleasure to have you. That's all we have time for tonight. Join me again on How We Got Here.